3 months ago, my life was as peaceful as a quiet river, flowing smoothly with a few ripples here and there. I was Margaret Sullivan, a 67-year-old woman who had recently lost her husband, Tom. We had spent nearly 45 years together, building a life that was simple but fulfilling. We had our house, a beautiful garden that I tended to with love, and a little book club that met once a week. Life, as I knew it, was calm, content, and predictable. I was okay with that. After all, what more could I need? I had my independence, my daily routine, and, most importantly, my family. Living in Portland, Oregon, I'd always found comfort in the familiar. Mrs. Chen, the neighbor who lived 2 houses down, checked in on me every morning to say hello and offer me a few freshly picked flowers from her garden. My friends from book club visited often, bringing stories of their lives and their children. It wasn't an extravagant life, but it was a life I had crafted with my own hands, a life that was mine, free from interference. But that all changed when my daughter, Sarah, called me one Tuesday morning, her voice dripping with concern. At first, it was the same familiar sound, the voice of a loving daughter checking in on her aging mother. "Mom," Sarah began, "we're worried about you living alone. What if something happens? What if you fall and no one's around to help?" I knew immediately that something was off. Behind her, I could hear Derek, her husband, clearing his throat, almost as though he were coaching her through a script. They had rehearsed this. I had no idea why it had taken this long for them to bring it up, but now that they had, I felt my guard go up. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I replied, watering my petunias. "Mrs. Chen next door checks on me daily, and I have my medical alert bracelet. I'm not alone, and I'm doing just fine." But that wasn't enough for them. Sarah pressed on, her voice becoming more insistent. "Mum, that's just not enough anymore. You're getting older, and we think it's time to make some adjustments." Adjustments? The word seemed so innocuous, so pleasant, but I knew exactly what she meant. I had lived my entire life making decisions for myself. I didn't need adjustments. I didn't need anyone telling me what I should do, especially not my daughter, who had her own family to manage. "I'm fine, Sarah. Honestly, I am. There's no need for adjustments." But Sarah didn't back down. She continued with her concerns, and soon, Derek joined in. Over the next few weeks, their visits increased. They'd arrive with takeout dinners, not to share a meal or spend time with me, but to check in. Their expressions were full of concern, but there was something insincere about it. They weren't just worried about my well-being, they were starting to control the narrative. Their questions became more probing, about my finances, my medications, my daily routine. Derek would walk through my house, making notes on his phone, as though he were cataloguing everything that wasn't up to his standards. The rug in my hallway, safety hazard. The step stool I used to reach high shelves, safety hazard. It was subtle at first, but it didn't take long for me to realize what they were doing. They weren't just concerned for me, they were trying to take control of my life. One day, Derek suggested I might want to simplify my banking. "All these different accounts, Mom," he said, shaking his head as he looked over my monthly statements. "It's so confusing. What if you make a mistake?" I had been managing my own finances for 47 years, including keeping the books for Tom's contracting business, but Derek's comment made it sound like all that experience had vanished the moment I turned 65 in his eyes. His words made me feel as though I was suddenly incapable of doing something I had been doing flawlessly for decades. The pressure campaign continued. One day, Sarah showed up with official-looking documents. They were filled with legal jargon, sticky notes marking where I should sign. "It's just a precaution," Sarah explained, her tone soft but persuasive. "A power of attorney, so we can help if you ever need us to." I looked at the papers, my stomach turning. "I'll have my lawyer review these first," I said, trying to assert some control over the situation. The room's temperature seemed to drop. Sarah's face became tight, and Derek's jaw clenched. The air between us became thick with tension. "Mum, don't you trust us?" Sarah asked, her voice sounding wounded, as though I had betrayed her by simply wanting to ensure that I wasn't signing away my autonomy. Of course, I trusted them. They were my daughter and son-in-law. They'd been married for 15 years, had given me 3 beautiful grandchildren, and Derek had a stable job at an insurance company while Sarah taught 2nd grade. They were respectable, responsible adults. Or so I thought. That was my first mistake. As the days passed, I began to feel the pressure mounting. Sarah called me more frequently, often reminding me of my declining abilities. "Mum, you forgot Tommy's baseball game last weekend," she would say. But the truth was that I hadn't forgotten. I hadn't been told about it. One afternoon, Mrs. Patterson, who lived a few houses down from me, told Sarah that I seemed confused at the grocery store. But Mrs. Patterson had never spoken to me in her life. It was as if Sarah was fabricating incidents of my decline to justify her actions. Then came the moment that truly shook me. One morning, I discovered that my pill organizer had been completely mixed up. Tuesday's pills were in Friday's slot, and my blood pressure medication was in the section for my vitamins. It was so out of place that I called Sarah, confused and upset. "Mum," Sarah sighed when I explained, "this is exactly what we've been worried about. What if you had taken the wrong pills? What if you overdosed?" I stared at the pill organizer, certain I hadn't made that mistake. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. Had I been forgetful lately? Was I losing my grip on the simple tasks I had managed for so many years? That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through my house, checking the locks on all the doors, inspecting my surroundings for signs of my supposed decline. But everything seemed normal, organized, clean. My checkbook balanced to the penny. My bills were current. My mind felt as sharp as ever. But Sarah's words echoed in my head. What if you overdosed? The next morning, Derek showed up unannounced, his excuse being that he was in the neighborhood, even though his office was 20 minutes away. "Sarah asked me to check on you after yesterday's scare," he said, walking through my kitchen and opening cabinets, checking my refrigerator for expired food, as though I were a child who couldn't be trusted with dairy products. "Everything looks good," he announced, but I noticed that he was photographing my medication bottles with his phone. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling with the anxiety that had been building for weeks. "Just keeping track," Derek replied smoothly, as though this was all perfectly normal. "Sarah worries, you know. She asked me to document your prescription so we can help you stay organized." I had never felt more like a prisoner in my own home. Their vocabulary was revealing. Track, organize, document. It was all about controlling every aspect of my life, from my finances to my medications. I wasn't just an elderly woman who needed help. I was becoming a project to them, something to be managed. By this point, I knew something had to be done. I called my lawyer, Robert Martinez, who had been my trusted attorney for 15 years. I needed legal protection before they pushed me too far. The next few days after I called Robert were filled with an unnerving mix of quiet fear and growing resolve. I had spent my whole life being independent, managing my home and finances with confidence. But now, it seemed like everything was unraveling. Derek and Sarah's persistent behavior was wearing me down. I could feel them closing in, slowly but steadily, turning my once peaceful home into a battlefield where my autonomy was at stake. The pressure didn't let up. Derek continued to stop by unannounced, always with a new reason. "Just checking on you, Mom. We've been concerned about your health," he would say, his voice heavy with what I could now recognize as a false sense of concern. Sarah would call every day, her tone more urgent with each passing conversation. "Mum, don't you think it's time we made some changes? We just want to make sure you're taken care of." I had heard these words before, but now they sounded like an echo of something much darker. It wasn't just about concern for me anymore. It was about control. They weren't worried about my health. They were worried about my independence, and they were using every tactic they could think of to strip it away. Their subtle manipulation had become blatant, and I could no longer ignore it. The tipping point came one evening when Sarah called, her voice sweet but tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "Mum, I've been doing some research on assisted living facilities. You know, places that provide more care, just in case. It's really a great option for people your age." "What do you think?" I froze. The way she phrased it was so casual, as though it were the most natural thing in the world to be planning my future without even asking for my input. "I think I'm fine where I am, Sarah," I replied, trying to sound calm, but the frustration was beginning to bubble beneath my words. "I have everything I need. I don't want to move to one of those places." Her voice softened, but the undercurrent of manipulation was still there. "Mum, we're just trying to make sure you're comfortable. It's just a precaution." The phrase, "just a precaution," had become their catch-all excuse for everything they wanted me to do. I wasn't stupid. I knew what they were doing. They had been softening me up with their concerns, gradually wearing down my defenses, all while pretending to be helpful. But the truth was, they were already making decisions about my life behind my back. It was that night that I realized I had to take action. I could no longer wait passively for this situation to resolve itself. If I didn't do something now, I would lose everything: my financial independence, my right to make decisions, and my dignity. It was clear that Sarah and Derek saw me as nothing more than a liability to be managed, and I refused to let them succeed. The next morning, I called Robert Martinez, my lawyer. He had been my trusted attorney for over 15 years, and I needed him now more than ever. When he answered the phone, I didn't waste any time. "Robert, I need your help. I've been dealing with some pressure from Sarah and Derek. They're trying to get me to sign legal documents, and I'm not sure what to do. They want control over my finances, and they're pushing me toward assisted living." Robert's voice was calm, but I could hear the concern in it. "Margaret, it sounds like you're dealing with elder financial abuse. I can't tell you what to do, but you have options. Let me review the documents Sarah and Derek are pushing on you, and we'll figure out the best course of action." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. At least now I wasn't alone. I had someone who could help me navigate this mess. But it wasn't enough just to have a lawyer's help. I had to act quickly. If Derek and Sarah were serious about pushing me into a situation I didn't want, I needed to be prepared. That afternoon, I went through every document I could find: my bank statements, my wills, any contracts or legal paperwork that might be relevant. I made copies and set them aside in a safe place. But it wasn't just the paperwork that worried me. It was the subtle tactics they were using to control me. Derek had been taking photos of my medication bottles, documenting every little thing to keep track. They were setting the stage for something much bigger, and I could see it coming. The next day, I went to Robert's office. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. When I arrived, Robert greeted me with his usual warmth, but his eyes were sharp with concern. "Margaret, I've reviewed the power of attorney documents that Sarah and Derek wanted you to sign. These aren't normal documents. They give them complete control over your finances, your property, and even your medical decisions." I could feel my heart racing. "But they told me it was just a precaution, a safety net." "It's not," Robert said firmly. "They're giving themselves the power to make decisions for you without your consent. They can sell your house, access your bank accounts, even move you into a care facility without you having any say. This is serious, Margaret. We need to act fast." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. The reality of the situation was hitting me hard. I had spent my life building my independence, and now it was being stripped away, piece by piece, by the people I trusted the most. "What can we do?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though my hands were shaking. "We need to document everything," Robert explained. "Every phone call, every visit, every time they pressure you." We also need to establish your mental competency with a professional evaluation. If we can prove that you're being coerced and manipulated, we can protect you." I nodded, the weight of the situation sinking in. I had to take action now, or I would lose everything. Robert helped me make a plan to protect my assets and my future. We would freeze my accounts, establish a new power of attorney that would safeguard my interests, and take steps to make sure that Derek and Sarah couldn't manipulate me again. But I knew the fight wasn't over. They weren't going to give up easily. And as I left Robert's office, I realized something important. This wasn't just about my finances, it was about reclaiming my life. I wasn't going to let Sarah and Derek push me around anymore. The time for passivity was over. It was time to take control of my future. The following weeks felt like an intense game of cat and mouse. With Robert's guidance, I began the painstaking task of documenting everything Sarah and Derek had said and done. Every phone call, every visit, every time they made a subtle push for control. I made sure to write it all down. But what terrified me most wasn't their direct tactics. It was the psychological manipulation they used to make me doubt myself. Sarah's calls became more frequent, and each conversation seemed designed to plant seeds of doubt in my mind. "Mom, don't you think it's time we talked about moving you into a safer place?" she would ask, her voice dripping with feigned concern. "What if something happens? What if you fall and no one is there to help?" At first I resisted, repeating that I was fine, that I had everything I needed. But Sarah wasn't ready to let go. Her voice grew more insistent, more coaxing. She no longer just asked, she told me what was best for me. "You really shouldn't be living alone, Mom. You're not getting any younger. It's for your own good." Each conversation left me feeling unsettled. They weren't just worried about me. They were worried about losing control. I could hear it in her voice. And then there was Derek, who continued to appear at my door, unannounced, always checking in. "Just making sure everything's all right, Mom," he would say, his tone casual but carrying a weight of expectation behind it. His visits always seemed to coincide with moments when I would feel the most vulnerable, like the time I had misplaced my keys or forgotten a small detail. They capitalized on these small lapses to make me question my ability to manage my own life. Then came the day that Derek showed up with a stack of documents, official-looking papers, filled with terms I didn't fully understand. "We think it's time you sign these, Mom," he said with a forced smile. "It's just for your own protection, really." I felt my pulse quicken. I knew exactly what they were trying to do. These papers, with their legal jargon and fine print, were the same kind of documents they'd presented to me weeks ago. Documents that gave them power of attorney, allowing them to take full control over my finances and even my medical decisions. I set the papers aside, trying to remain calm. "I'll have my lawyer review these first," I said, my voice shaking but resolute. The room grew tense. Derek's smile faded, replaced by a thin line of frustration on his face. "Mom, we're just trying to help," he said, his tone sharp now. "This isn't about control. This is about making sure you're not alone when you need us." His words were a contradiction in themselves. The more they claimed to be helping, the more I felt as though they were taking away my agency. They weren't just offering help. They were trying to take over every aspect of my life. It wasn't about protecting me. It was about protecting their own interests. That night, after Derek left, I sat in my living room, feeling the weight of the situation. The woman who had raised her children with love and care, who had worked hard to create a stable and independent life, was now being treated like a child. My own daughter and son-in-law were undermining me, manipulating me into thinking I couldn't manage my own affairs. I had to find a way out of this, and I had to do it quickly. The following day, I made the call to Robert. "Robert, I need your help," I said, my voice steady but filled with underlying fear. "They're pushing me harder now. They've brought more papers, and they're insisting I sign them. I can't keep letting this happen." Robert's voice was calm, but I could hear the urgency in it. "Margaret, it's time to take action. You can't let them pressure you any longer. Let's get the documentation in order, and we'll set up a strategy to protect your assets and your rights." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. I wasn't alone in this fight. I had someone on my side, someone who knew the legal landscape and could help me protect my autonomy. The days following my conversation with Robert were a blur of legal paperwork, phone calls, and careful planning. The sense of urgency grew with each passing day, as Derek and Sarah's tactics became more aggressive and their expectations clearer. They didn't want to give up, and they didn't want to lose control over me. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Robert moved quickly, gathering all the necessary documents to protect my finances and my well-being. The power of attorney papers Sarah and Derek had presented to me were now under legal scrutiny. The plan was simple but critical. I needed to create a protective structure around my assets, one that would be nearly impossible for them to breach. I couldn't risk them gaining access to my accounts and potentially draining my savings. I made an appointment with Robert for the next day to finalize everything. He had already prepared the legal documentation for a new power of attorney, one that would ensure my control over my assets and medical decisions with no room for manipulation. The key was to create an irrevocable trust, which would prevent any sudden changes to my estate or finances. But even more important was the need for professional evaluations that would confirm my mental competency and help safeguard me from further manipulation. The process was daunting, but Robert's calm demeanor and reassuring words kept me grounded. "We're doing this to protect you, Margaret," he said. "It's important that we have everything in place before Sarah and Derek escalate things even further." The next day, as I sat across from Robert in his office, the weight of the situation began to hit me. I had always been a woman who took pride in managing her own life. I had never imagined that I would be sitting here, needing legal protection from my own daughter and son-in-law. But here I was, doing what was necessary to defend myself. "We'll need to act quickly," Robert said as he finalized the last of the documents. "The key is to act decisively before they can take further steps to gain control over your life. If they suspect what we're doing, they might try to intervene before it's too late." I nodded, knowing that Robert was right. I couldn't afford to waste any time. The pressure from Sarah and Derek had already been building for weeks, and the last thing I wanted was to give them another chance to manipulate me into signing more documents or making decisions I would regret. Later that afternoon, as I sat quietly at home, I reviewed the trust documents Robert had prepared for me. I felt a sense of relief as I read through each clause. The documents would protect me, ensuring that I retained full control over my assets and my life. It was like putting up an invisible shield that would guard against the encroachment of Sarah and Derek's influence. But there was one last thing I needed to do before I could truly breathe easy. I needed to take the next step and freeze my accounts. With Robert's assistance, I would work with the bank to ensure that Sarah and Derek's names were removed as joint account holders. This was my final line of defense. The following morning, I made the call to Patricia Chen, the bank manager who had been so helpful when I slipped her the note during my visit with Sarah and Derek. Patricia had been instrumental in helping me flag the suspicious transactions and ensure that my accounts were protected. Now I needed her help to lock things down completely. "Margaret, I'm so glad you called," Patricia said warmly when I reached her. "I've been following the steps we discussed, and everything is in place. The accounts are flagged, and I've documented everything that's happened so far. We'll make sure that no further transactions are made without your explicit consent." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The sense of security I'd been lacking for so long was now in place. Patricia's support had been invaluable, and I knew that with her and Robert on my side, I would be able to protect myself from any further manipulation. The next few days were filled with tense anticipation. Sarah and Derek were still trying to reach me, calling multiple times a day. I didn't pick up, Instead, I focused on my plans. I knew they would try to pressure me into seeing them, but I wasn't about to fall into their trap again. They needed to understand that their manipulation wouldn't work. Saturday arrived, and as expected, Derek showed up unannounced. I heard the knock on my door and knew exactly who it was. My heart raced, but I steadied myself. I wasn't going to let him bully me again. When I opened the door, Derek stood there with his usual smug expression. "Margaret, we need to talk," he said, stepping forward as if he were entitled to walk right in. I crossed my arms and stepped back, blocking his way. "I don't think we need to talk, Derek," I said calmly, though the anger simmered beneath my voice. "You and Sarah have crossed a line, and I won't let you push me around any longer." Derek's expression faltered for a moment, and I could see the mask of control slipping. "What's this all about, Margaret? We've been worried about you. We just want what's best." "No, Derek," I interrupted. "You want control, and I'm not going to let you have it. Not anymore. I've taken steps to protect myself, and there's nothing you can do to change that." He stood there, speechless for a moment, clearly stunned by my defiance. But I could see the calculation in his eyes as he processed my words. "We're just trying to help you," he repeated, though the sincerity was gone from his voice. "I don't need your help," I said firmly. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my life, and I won't allow you or Sarah to manipulate me any longer." Derek opened his mouth, probably to argue further, but I didn't give him the chance. "I've already spoken with my lawyer, and I've already set up protections. I don't need you in my business anymore." The shock on his face was evident, but I didn't care. I was finally taking control, and I wouldn't let them bully me any longer. I knew the road ahead would be tough. They wouldn't give up easily. But I was ready. I had done everything necessary to protect myself, and now I had the strength to defend what was rightfully mine. The weeks that followed were tense. Despite the legal protections in place, I knew that Sarah and Derek wouldn't give up easily. They had been playing the long game, using their influence over me to manipulate my actions and decisions. Now that I had drawn a line in the sand, I knew they would fight harder to regain control over my life, but I wasn't backing down. I had already taken the necessary steps to safeguard my assets and my freedom, and I wasn't going to let them undermine that. One evening I received a call from Sarah. Her voice was carefully neutral, though I could sense the underlying frustration. "Mom, I think we need to talk about everything that's been going on." I paused before answering. "I don't think there's anything left to discuss, Sarah. I've made my decision, and I'm not going to change it." There was a long silence on the other end. I could practically hear her scrambling for a response. "You've made a mistake, Mom. We've only been trying to help. We're worried about you. We don't want to see you end up in a situation where you can't take care of yourself." "I can take care of myself," I replied, keeping my tone firm. "I don't need you or Derek managing my life. I've handled my finances for 47 years, and I'm perfectly capable of doing it on my own. I've taken the necessary steps to protect myself legally. This isn't just about what you want, it's about my right to make my own decisions." She let out a deep sigh, the kind that sounded both exasperated and defeated. "Mum, we're just looking out for you. We're trying to make sure that you're not left alone or unprotected. Don't you see? You're not getting any younger." "Being older doesn't mean I need to be treated like a child," I snapped, "and I'm tired of hearing that excuse. I'm perfectly capable of making my own choices." There was no response for a moment, and when Sarah finally spoke again, her voice was softer. "I'm just scared, Mom. I don't want to lose you. I don't want you to be alone, and I don't want to be responsible for something happening to you." I felt a pang in my heart at her words. As a mother, I understood the fear of losing a loved one, but I also understood that love didn't mean control. "I'm not going anywhere, Sarah," I said gently, my voice softening. "But you have to understand that I'm not a child. I've lived my life, and I will continue to do so on my own terms." After the conversation, I sat down and thought about everything that had happened. I wasn't angry at Sarah. I was hurt that my own daughter, someone I had loved and cared for, could see me as someone to be controlled. But it wasn't just Sarah's actions that hurt. It was the realization that I had allowed myself to be manipulated for too long. In the weeks that followed, I continued to monitor my accounts, making sure no unauthorized transactions took place. Robert had ensured that everything was in place, but I knew that Sarah and Derek were still finding ways to undermine me. It became a game of cat and mouse, but I wasn't about to lose. I was determined to keep control of my life, no matter how hard they tried. One evening, Derek showed up at my door again, his demeanor colder than before. "Margaret, we need to talk," he said, his voice firm. "You've gone too far this time. This whole situation has gotten out of hand." I wasn't going to let him intimidate me again. "Derek, I've made my decision," I said calmly, though I could feel the tension building inside me. "And I'm not going to change it." He stepped closer, his expression hardening. "You're making a huge mistake. You don't even realize how much you're putting yourself at risk. We're just trying to look out for you." I shook my head. "You're not looking out for me. You're trying to take control of my life, and I'm not going to let you. I've already made the necessary arrangements. My accounts are frozen, and I've established protections. I'm done." Derek stood there, glaring at me, but I held my ground. I had finally come to terms with the fact that I didn't need to please everyone, especially not Sarah and Derek. I had worked hard for everything I had, and I wasn't going to let anyone, no matter how close they were, take that away from me. The next few days were quiet, but I could feel the storm brewing. Sarah called less frequently, and when she did, I could tell she was trying to act like nothing had happened. But the tension was there, lurking beneath the surface. I knew they weren't giving up, and I wasn't naive enough to think this was over. One Saturday, I received a surprise visit from a lawyer representing Sarah and Derek. He handed me a letter that contained a legal challenge to the trust and the protective measures I had put in place. They were contesting the documents and attempting to have them nullified. The battle was far from over, and it seemed like they were pulling out all the stops to get what they wanted. I called Robert immediately. "Robert, they've sent a lawyer to contest everything. What do I do now?" He listened carefully before responding. "Margaret, we've prepared for this. They can't just walk in and undo everything we've done. We'll fight this in court if we need to, but you need to stay strong." I nodded, but a sense of dread washed over me. I knew this wasn't just a legal battle. It was about something much deeper. It was about my right to live my life on my terms, to be treated with the respect I deserved. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. The days that followed felt like a slow, deliberate build-up to a confrontation I wasn't sure I was ready for. Sarah and Derek's behavior had become increasingly aggressive, but I knew that they couldn't keep pushing me forever. As much as they were determined to take control, I was just as determined to reclaim my life. I had already taken legal steps to protect myself, and I wasn't going to let them undo everything I had worked so hard for. It was a Thursday when I received an unexpected visit from Sarah. She arrived earlier than usual, her demeanor colder than I'd ever seen. She didn't knock. She simply opened the door, as if it were her right. I could feel my pulse quicken, but I kept my expression neutral. "Mom," she began without any preamble, "we need to talk about the situation. This has gone on long enough." Her words were sharp, laced with frustration. "You're making things harder than they need to be." I raised an eyebrow but remained silent. I knew exactly where this was headed. They had been maneuvering for so long, trying to wear me down with their manipulative tactics. But I wasn't backing down. "I've made my decision, Sarah," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not changing it." She let out a frustrated sigh, clearly not prepared for my resistance. "You don't understand, Mum. This isn't about control. This is about making sure you're safe, making sure you're taken care of. You don't have the capacity to manage things on your own anymore." Her words were like daggers, each one meant to wound. It was as though she thought I couldn't see through her manipulation anymore. "That's not true," I said, my voice steady, but filled with quiet strength. I'm perfectly capable of managing my life. I've been doing it for years. Sarah's expression faltered for just a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. This isn't you talking, Mom. You're confused. You're scared. Let us help you. I don't need your help, I said, finally allowing the frustration I'd been holding back to show. You've been trying to control me for months, and I won't stand for it anymore. You're not helping me. You're taking over. Her face hardened, and she stepped closer, lowering her voice. You don't know what's best for you anymore. You're old, Margaret. You're vulnerable. The sting of her words hit me hard, but I knew I had to stay strong. I'm not old. And I'm not vulnerable, I said, meeting her gaze head-on. I've lived a full life, and I'm still perfectly capable of making my own decisions. You may think you're helping, but you're not. You're stripping me of my independence. For a moment, the room was silent. Sarah looked at me, as though she was seeing me for the first time. Really seeing me. I could see the flicker of realization in her eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it came. She shook her head and took a step back. I don't know what's gotten into you. You're being irrational. I stood my ground, refusing to let her words shake me. No, Sarah, I'm not being irrational. I'm protecting myself. Without another word, she turned and left, slamming the door behind her. I stood there for a moment, the tension in my chest slowly starting to release. But the relief was short-lived. I knew that Sarah and Derek weren't done. They wouldn't accept defeat so easily, and they had already shown how far they were willing to go to manipulate me. The very next day, I received an unexpected call from Derek. His voice was tight, his tone clipped. Margaret, I think you need to reconsider what you've done. This whole thing is going to destroy the family. Destroy the family? I asked, incredulous. You've been destroying it for months, Derek. You've been pushing me around, trying to control my every move. What's left of the family is already gone. He sighed heavily. We're just trying to look out for you. We're worried about you. You don't understand what's happening here. I understand perfectly, I said, my voice firm and clear. You've made it all too clear. You're not looking out for me, Derek. You're looking out for yourselves. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Derek finally spoke again, his voice softer, but filled with frustration. You're making a big mistake, Margaret. You don't realize what's at stake here. I realize exactly what's at stake, I said. It's my life. It's my choice. And I'm not going to let you take it from me. Another silence stretched between us. Then Derek spoke again, this time with a hint of finality. Fine. If you want to go down this path, we'll see how it works out for you. The line went dead, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. The conversation had been exhausting, and I could feel the weight of it bearing down on me. But I also felt a sense of clarity that I hadn't experienced before. I had made my decision, and no one, not even my own family, was going to take that away from me. That night, I sat in my kitchen, sipping my tea and thinking about the road ahead. I knew this battle wasn't over yet. Sarah and Derek wouldn't give up so easily, but I also knew that I had the strength to fight for myself. They had underestimated me for too long, but they were about to see what I was truly capable of. The next morning, I met with Robert once again. He had already set up the new power of attorney documents and the irrevocable trust, and he had arranged for everything to be legally binding. It felt like the final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. The trust would ensure that no one could touch my assets without my explicit permission. It would protect me from any further attempts at manipulation. I've got everything ready, Robert said as he handed me the documents. All we need to do now is finalize the process. I took the papers from him, feeling the weight of them in my hands. These documents were more than just legal protection. They were a declaration of my independence. They were my shield against anyone who thought they could control me. It had been a week since I finalized the legal documents, and while I felt a sense of relief, there was still an underlying tension in the air. Derek and Sarah were not the type to accept defeat, and I knew they were already plotting their next move. I couldn't let my guard down, not even for a moment. the road ahead would require vigilance, and I was ready for whatever they threw my way. The first sign of their next move came early on a Monday morning. I had just finished my coffee when I heard a knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the last thing I wanted was another uninvited visit from Sarah or Derek. I walked cautiously to the door, peeking through the peephole. To my surprise, it wasn't either of them. It was a man I didn't recognize, holding a clipboard and wearing a suit. I opened the door a crack, keeping the chain lock on. "Can I help you?" "Good morning, ma'am," the man said with a polite smile. "I'm here on behalf of Sarah and Derek Sullivan. I have a few documents that require your signature. It's a formal matter." My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what was coming. They were trying to force my hand again, trying to pressure me into doing what they wanted. "I'm not signing anything today," I said firmly, my voice steady. "Please leave." The man's smile faltered for a moment, and I could see the surprise in his eyes. "Ma'am, I've been instructed to get your signature. If you'd like, I can arrange a time for you to meet with Sarah and Derek to discuss the matter further." I shook my head, my resolve hardening. "I'll deal with Sarah and Derek directly. You can go now." The man hesitated, but then nodded. "Very well, ma'am, but please note that your refusal to sign may have legal consequences." I didn't flinch. "You're free to go ahead and report that to them," I replied, closing the door with a firm click. I stood there for a moment, heart racing, but I knew this was just the beginning. They were trying to force me back into a corner, but I wasn't going to allow it. I wasn't the same woman I had been when this all started. The naive, trusting woman who had let them take control of her life was gone. In her place was someone who knew exactly what needed to be done to protect her independence. That afternoon, I called Robert. I wasn't surprised by the visit, but I wanted to make sure I was prepared for the next steps. "They're trying to pressure me into signing more documents, Robert," I said, my voice tight with frustration. "What should I do?" Robert was calm as usual, his voice steady and reassuring. "You did the right thing, Margaret. They're trying to intimidate you, but you've set everything up to protect yourself. If they try again, it's important that you remain firm. You're legally protected now." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'm not going to give in. I'm done being intimidated." "Good," he said. "If they come again, make sure you document everything. Keep a record of all interactions. And if they try to escalate things further, don't hesitate to call me." After the call, I sat quietly for a moment, processing everything. The weight of the situation was still heavy on my shoulders, but I had a sense of empowerment now that I didn't have before. I knew I wasn't alone in this fight. I had a legal team and a support system that was looking out for me. But as the days passed, it became clear that Sarah and Derek weren't backing down. Their behavior grew more erratic, and I could sense that they were growing desperate. They were trying to break my resolve, but I was ready for them. I had prepared for this battle, and I wasn't going to lose. The following Saturday, I received another unexpected visitor. This time, it was Sarah. She stood on my doorstep, her expression carefully neutral. I could see the anxiety in her eyes, though she was trying her best to hide it. "Mom," she began, her voice quieter than usual. "We need to talk. Please, I just want us to get past this." I studied her for a moment, trying to gauge her intentions. I had learned that Sarah was good at playing the role of the concerned daughter, but I wasn't fooled anymore. The pressure they were putting on me was relentless, but it was also transparent. This was her attempt to make me feel guilty for standing my ground. "I've already made it clear where I stand, Sarah," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I'm not signing anything, and I'm not moving into any facility." Her eyes flickered with frustration, but she quickly masked it with a forced smile. "I understand you're upset, Mom, but you're not thinking clearly. We're just trying to make sure you're comfortable and safe. Please, let us help you." I could see the manipulation creeping in again, and it made my blood boil. "No, Sarah," I said firmly. This isn't about comfort or safety. This is about control, and I won't let you control me anymore." She opened her mouth as if to argue, but I cut her off. "I've already made the arrangements. I've set up protections. I don't need your help." The silence between us was thick, but I didn't flinch. I knew what she was trying to do. She was trying to chip away at my confidence, but I wasn't going to let it happen. "This is for your own good, Mom," Sarah said quietly, her voice cracking just slightly. "We just don't want you to be alone." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I realized just how far gone she had become. Her actions had nothing to do with love or concern. It was all about control, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. "I'm not alone, Sarah, and I don't need you to take care of me. I'm not a child. I'm still your mother, and I'm perfectly capable of living my life." Sarah looked at me, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in her eyes, but then it was gone, replaced by something colder. She stood there for a moment longer, then nodded curtly. "Fine," she said, "but don't think this is over. We'll be back." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing on the porch, my heart pounding. But I didn't feel fear. I felt something else. Empowerment. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my own life again. As the days passed, Sarah and Derek's attempts to manipulate me grew even more insistent. They didn't just want control over my finances. They wanted control over my very life. The pressure was relentless. Sarah would call, her voice sweet and caring, trying to convince me that they were just looking out for me. But I wasn't fooled. I knew exactly what they were doing. Despite the increasing tension, I stuck to my guns. I had done everything right. My lawyer, Robert, had ensured that my finances were protected, and the irrevocable trust had been set up to shield my assets. But even with these legal protections in place, I knew that Sarah and Derek weren't going to give up. They would find a way to try and manipulate me again, and I had to be prepared for whatever came next. That afternoon, I received a call from Robert. His tone was serious, and I could sense that something had changed. "Margaret, I've received some troubling news. I just got word that Sarah and Derek have escalated things. They've hired a private investigator to look into your financial situation and your mental competency." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This was more than I had anticipated. They had already tried to control my finances, but now they were questioning my mental state, hoping to find some weakness they could exploit. I had known they wouldn't just walk away, but this was a whole new level. "They won't stop, will they?" I asked, my voice trembling despite myself. "No," Robert said, his voice firm but filled with empathy. "But you've taken the right steps. You've set everything up to protect yourself. We'll keep pushing back. You don't have to face this alone." His words were a lifeline, but the reality of the situation was sinking in. Sarah and Derek were going to keep attacking, and now they had enlisted more resources to make sure they got what they wanted. It was no longer just about manipulating me. It was about dismantling everything I had built to protect myself. The next few days were tense. I received another call from Sarah, this time with a much sharper edge to her voice. "Mom, I know you're angry, but you need to understand that we're just doing this because we care. We don't want you to end up in a place where you're isolated or incapable of making decisions. We're trying to make sure you're safe." "Safe from what?" I asked, my patience thinning. "Safe from myself. I'm not the one who needs help, Sarah. You and Derek are the ones who are out of line. You don't get to make decisions for me. I'm not a child. I'm your mother." The silence on the other end was palpable, as if Sarah wasn't sure how to respond. She had tried to play the concerned daughter, but I wasn't buying it anymore. I could hear the frustration building in her voice when she finally spoke. "You're not thinking clearly. We just want what's best for you. Why can't you see that?" "Because what you want is control," I said, my voice low but steady. "And I won't let you have it. Not now. Not ever." Sarah's tone shifted, and for the first time in this whole ordeal, I heard something I hadn't expected. Desperation. "Please, Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be." It was like a switch had been flipped. The soft voice, the pleading tone, it was all part of the manipulation. She was no longer my daughter, trying to help me. She was a woman desperate to take what she wanted, and she would stop at nothing to get it. "I've made my decision," I said, my voice unwavering. "And this is the last time I'll say it. I'm done with your manipulation." She hung up without saying another word, and for a moment, I just stood there, the weight of the conversation sinking in. This wasn't just a disagreement between mother and daughter anymore. It was a battle for control, my control, and I wasn't going to let her take that from me. Later that evening, I received a visit from Robert. He had come to update me on the situation and ensure I was still holding firm. "I've been in touch with the bank again," he said as he sat down across from me. "We've flagged all the suspicious transactions, and I've made sure they're aware of everything that's happened. But it's important that we keep moving forward with the legal process. The more evidence we have, the stronger our case will be." I nodded, grateful for his support. "I'm not backing down, Robert. They think they can break me, but they've underestimated me. I've spent my whole life building a future for myself, and I'm not going to let them take it away now." "That's the right mindset," Robert said, his voice filled with approval. "But you have to be prepared. They're not going to stop. They'll keep pushing, trying to find ways to make you doubt yourself. You need to stay strong." The truth of his words hit me hard. I had made it this far, but I knew the battle was far from over. Every day, Sarah and Derek would keep pushing, trying to break me down, but I wasn't going to let them win. I would fight for my independence, for my life, until the very end. That night, I sat on my porch, staring out at the garden I had so lovingly tended for years. The roses were still blooming, vibrant and strong, just like my resolve. The world outside seemed peaceful, but I knew that a storm was brewing. My family was no longer a source of comfort. They had become a threat to my autonomy. As I sat there, I thought about everything that had happened, about how I had let Sarah and Derek manipulate me for so long, thinking I could trust them. I thought about how my own daughter had turned against me, not out of malice, but out of her own insecurities and desires to control. But no more. I had taken control of my life back, and I wasn't going to let them take it from me again. I stood up, my decision final. The next step would be difficult, but I was ready for it. I wasn't going to just survive this. I was going to live my life on my terms, no matter what it took. This was my fight, and I was going to win.